Well, that was a weird one to hang up there. Welcome back to the Engineered Angler. My name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer and a lure designer. Today, we're gonna make another plexiglass lure. I'm actually using Lexan. I don't know why I keep calling it plexiglass. And these are 1/8 inch thick sheets, and I found this stuff in a recycle center. It's like a repurposing center. Places like that are great places to find oddball materials to make things out of. So I've already made a couple of lures, and my original design concept was to have not just a transparent lure, but a lure that looked very 3D in that the paint job would be layered throughout the layers of the Lexan. And in the first one I made, I just had a solid lure. It was sort of a minnow shape. In the second one, this one, I added a little bit of an air chamber on top, and that improved the sink rate and improved the dynamic stability of the lure and gave this lure a real nice action. But this time I want to have action on the inside of the lure. I want to make a lure that when you jerk it and it stops, something inside keeps moving. So let me show you what we're going to do. Alright, so I'm going to start off with a very basic shad shape. And before I get into further detail, I just want to say thank you to everybody who commented in the community section of the channel and was following my progress during my vacation out there in Oregon and on my way back, as I was really concerned about Hurricane Nicole and whether I was actually going to be able to fly into Miami or not, and what I was going to find when I got back up here. Luckily, it was just some broken branches. My boat broke one of the dock lines and I had to fish some of the dock chairs out of the lake. So the lure is going to be about 5 1/4 inches long. The fattest part, top to bottom, is going to be 1 1/4 inches. And I put the metric units here. And it's going to be very standard looking as far as the configuration. The hook eye for the belly and the tail, and the tie-on eye, they're all going to be relatively where you would expect to find them on any twitch bait or jerk bait. What we're going to add is a chamber in here that's going to be hollow and then partially filled with a combination of fluids that'll look like internal organs, and when you jerk it and it stops, all that stuff will continue to flow. Now, in the process of coming up with that combination of fluids that I'm going to use in there, I was messing around with a bunch of dyes and I absolutely made a mess. Luckily, I was able to get all the purple dye off my hands, but I had to use a whole roll of paper towels and a bunch of acetone. It was a nightmare. I got it all over my shoes. I was afraid I was going to track it back into the house. So I had to clean the floor, I had to clean my hands. How I didn't get it on my jacket, I don't know. Anyway, moral of the story, if you're messing with dyes, make sure the cap's on before you pick it up or shake it. But I'll get more into how I created that fluid as we get further along on the project. First, let's get this stuff cut down because I'm gonna need more than I usually use. Typically, I've been using 4 layers of this Lexan. This time, I'm gonna use 6. So it's gonna be a little thicker. Alright, so I've got them cut, and I really need to take all these protective layers off these things and leave it nice and clean. So I'm going to be sticking these things together, these different layers, with this Scotch roll-on double stick tape. This stuff says it's permanent, but realistically it'll come apart pretty easily, but hold together as I'm shaping it. So I just run some strips and line them up best I can and press them together. And instead of gluing them all together all at once, I'm just gluing them up in pairs. This way I can cut out the shape on the center pair and cut out that chamber before I put it all completely together. Alright, I've gone ahead and glued them all together so I can cut out the general shape. And I made a little bit of an executive decision here, and I decided to shorten it just a little bit So I actually took a 1/4 inch off, so it's going to be 5 inches total. The other dimensions are staying the same. All right, I'm pretty happy with the shape. I think the cutting came out pretty nice and smooth. The only thing is I'm having a little bit of cold feet about the thickness of this thing. I mean, that's a full 3/4 inch. I'm not sure I want it that thick. Thing is I really would like it in 5 layers, but I gotta have even numbers. So do I go down to 4 layers again, or do I stick with this big heavy looking thing? I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about it a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and grab lunch, think about it, and you guys let me know what you think. What would you do? Remember, all this is experimental. I have not built one like this before. I'm using a little bit of intuition and engineering, sort of intuitioneering, something to think about. I'll be back and we'll finish it up. Yep, I decided to go ahead and go with the full thickness. Might as well stick to my design. I've gone ahead and put in some taper lines. It's a good idea to put taper lines. You really want to have a good symmetric shape so the lure behaves properly in the water. Doesn't end up rolling to one side or the other. So as usual, I'm going to go ahead and shape this on the belt sander out there. Get it close to the shape I want it and then bring it in here for some final hand sanding. Alright, so I'm pretty pleased with the shape. It looks like frosted glass, but I've got the general shape in and it's pretty symmetric. The next step is to pull this thing apart and plan the paint job. Okay, so now I'm going to clean all the glue off of it and we'll start the paint job. Alright, so that's the parts. It would be pretty cool if you could get a kit like this, right? Just a clear lure sliced up in little segments. But at this point, you got to kind of stop and think a little bit because the paint scheme has to be designed from the inside out. So it's a little bit of a mind bender. Alright, so like I said, you got to paint from the inside out. I've got these things mounted here with some little wire hangers, and this face right here is the very inside face of this middle piece. So this is actually the very middle of the lure, and I'm gonna spray a little bit of kind of a gray blue paint. It's called Ghost Tint Blue. All right, so before I move on to the outer layers of these things, I have to do a little bit of detail work. I've gone ahead and sketched in the gill plates and the mouth, and all I did was trace it through to the other side. And so I've got the drawing on the inside of both of these outside plates. But I also want to include a lateral line, just sort of the indication of a vertebrae. So I'm going to use this little saw blade so that the line ends up being just a little bit ragged. There you go. So when they come together, they should align pretty well. All right, so now on these intermediate pieces, I've gone ahead and put a piece of tape on there with a little bit of an arc, and that should protect the area where that fluid cavity is going to be, so it'll show really well. So this is the inside, and that's the outside. My plan is to put some transparent gold yellow here, and then use some copper colored scales here on the outside of this one. It's taken me a couple of tries to get this on there nice and flat, but we'll go with it. I'm going to go ahead and use this copper color. This is also a ghost tint color. It's called Ghost Tint Brown. All right, let's take a look at it. That looks pretty cool. So now I'm just going to put a strike eye right here near the tail, and I'm going to darken in around the eye a little bit. That should do it. Very cool. I'm going to put a little bit of red on the chin on the inside, and then we can glue these things together. And that's what that ends up looking like. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to assembling this thing, but I've got to let all this stuff dry, and we'll get back to it in a few minutes. Alright, so while we wait for that thing to dry, I'm going to go ahead and twist up the hook hangers and the tie-on eye. And as usual, I'm using leader wire and some 4-inch pieces of it. And I'll just make loops. And then I'll twist them up with these safety wire twisting pliers. Then all I have to do is cut them to length. I'll do 2 more of these. Alright, super easy to do, and I've got all these tools and materials in my Amazon store if you're interested. Alright, as usual, I'm going to go ahead and glue this together with some UV resin. And the first thing is the center pieces. And this has got to be sealed really well because remember, it's going to have fluid in it and I don't want it to leak out or leak anything in. Just want to make double sure I'm putting it together right. This one goes right here. And then it's just a matter of holding it under the light until it gets an initial set. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and glue the intermediate piece. It's the same process. This time I'm going to hit it with the UV flashlight just so I don't run the risk of moving it. So I'll just give it an initial set so it won't move. And hold it under the light for a little while to get a better set. Alright, so before I go ahead and glue the rest on here, I need to add the fluid to this chamber. So let me show you the concoction I came up with. So first, I'm going to add just a little bit of denatured alcohol to this little cup. And it's just about 1 milliliter. And then I'm going to add this dye. And this is Chinese dye, and I would give you a link to it, but I don't recommend them. They're really not good for anything. And this is the only use I have ever found for them. So, and I'll put 2 drops to give it a nice deep red. And the next ingredient is coconut oil, and I'm just going to pour just a tiny bit in here, maybe 3 milliliters, maybe 2, just enough so that I know I can half fill this cavity. And now I'm just going to take an eyedropper and put a couple of drops into the oil of this tinted alcohol. And you see it doesn't really mix, but when you stir it up, it becomes kind of these globules that look like maybe guts inside a fish. I've got to be careful because I don't want to get oil on the outside surface. Alright, that should do it. Alright, so before I glue this together, I'm going to have to clean this off to be absolutely certain I didn't get any oil. Alright, this is the sort of sketchy part. Now I got to glue it all together without spilling any of it. Alright, moment of truth. Let's get this thing put together. Get this thing initially set. Alright, so I've taken off my UV spotlight from its mount, and I'm going to just turn it on and set this thing right on top. And then when this sets up pretty decently, and I'm pretty confident that all the resin is nice and hard, and this thing won't leak, I'll go ahead and stick it in the bigger chamber and get it really set up. Alright, so that seems to have worked. Now I'm going to go ahead and glue on the outer plates and then set it in the chamber to really set up well. And once the resin's all set, we'll get back to doing the final paint on the outside. Well, I got a little bit of bad news. It turns out that the amount of heat that is produced by both those light bulbs and the resin setting up in the lure expanded the air in this chamber enough that it actually found a way to off gas or leak. And so when I pulled it out of there, there was a bunch of oil up on the surface. I've wiped it off since, but now I've got to decide what I'm going to do about that, because it's likely compromised the adhesion between the layers, at least the middle 2 layers. And that's important because that's where the screw eyes end up going, and they have to be in there well. So now I got to wonder what I'm going to do here. Now I hate having a failure in a video, but I promised everybody from the beginning that I was going to do experiments, and sometimes they would fail, and I would include all the failures in the videos. So you're welcome, I guess. So now I have to decide how I'm going to fix it. How do I recover from this? And what I want to do is split the lure back in half, clean everything out, and just back up and just put a couple of BBs in this thing and call it done. If I can't split it, I'll drill a hole and empty it, and then squirt a bunch of alcohol in there to get it all cleaned out, and then put the BBs in it. So first step is to try to split it. And we'll try to do this operation over some paper towels. Looks like we might get lucky, yeah. Well, this is what I was afraid of, and I'm glad of, actually. It actually did compromise the glue. There we go. It actually does look like real blood. But I think this is still a viable idea. I'm still going to do this with a different lure. Next time, the last thing I'll do is fill that cavity. I'll just have a hole and a vent, and I'll put some droplets in there, seal those 2 holes, and then coat it with a clear coat. All right, well, now I'm just going to clean up and reassemble. And this is going to take some acetone. And I'll get back to you when I got this thing glued back together and we're ready to put some BBs in it. All right, I've got these cleaned off, and I'm going to use the Total Boat resin because I'm finding that it actually sets up harder faster. All right, I'm going to go ahead and drop the BBs in here and hope that my luck changes and none of the resin gets inside there to bind up these BBs. We're going to go ahead and just swing for the fences here. Give it a good hard squeeze. Just make sure it's lined up. All right, I'm going to give it an initial set with this flashlight just so it doesn't move, and then I'm going to stick it in the bigger chamber and get it set up. That should only take about 20 minutes. All right, let's see what it looks like. It's not exactly what I planned. I can live with this. So let's get back in the paint booth and give this thing the final touches. So you can see I went ahead and put in the twist ties. I glued them in with UV resin, and if you want to see how I do that, you should watch the video of the last Lexan lure I made, and I'll put a link up above here somewhere. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of orange and then red on the chin, just to give the belly a little more color. All right, that looks pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to give this thing a little time to dry. Then I'm going to give it a couple of coats of Minwax polyacrylic as a mid coat just to seal it before I put on a couple of good thick coats of clear coat. It's going to need a little extra gloss to make this thing look good. All right, here it is. We're out on the lake. It's windy, it's cold. It's supposed to rain in an hour or so, I'm really happy that there's some sunshine out here. But this thing was such a struggle, I figured I'd have to get at least a little bit of underwater shots. But I've taken some photographs to show you how it came out. Here's a short slideshow while I get ready to do the underwater shots. So you might notice that I lost a lot of the detail that I put in it, both with paint and with the drawings. And that's because I handled this thing so much, because I had so many problems. And that's a good lesson for anybody who's just starting out making lures. Try to plan your build so that you handle your lure as little as possible. You'll end up with a much better result no matter what. And you know, these rattle around pretty nice, but I always design my lure specific to what I wanted originally, and the shape of this cavity in here was specifically designed for fluid, not for these balls, because the fluid would splash to the back, and then when the lure settled down, it would just splash back down and just kind of shake around. But the BBs are going to tend to want to stack up high in the cavity, and that's going to cause a problem with action. So I got a feeling it's going to be less than optimal, but we'll see. Hopefully it won't be too bad. All right, let's see what it looks like in the water. It sinks tail first. You got to expect, because that chamber is going to give it a little bit of buoyancy. So you see it's starting to kind of lay on its side a little bit. It'll walk the dog a little bit, but those BBs laying up high, and it's hard to get them to come down. And you can tell when they come back to the front because the lure behaves a little better. Let me see if I can get some underwater shots. Not exactly the perfect action in the water, but I think it'll work. It's tough to stay positive when you're making a lot of mistakes making your lures, and it really helps to have a good community of fellow lure builders giving you some enthusiasm and some information. And it's nice for me too to have all you guys watching and commenting and offering suggestions. I have to say I'm pretty lucky. I have a lot of really positive people that comment on the channel, and I really do appreciate it. All right, I'll see you all next Friday.